Around 10 p.m. on Wednesday, the 18th of March, I spoke to Mr. Johnson, the owner of the rugby club. He told me that he was positive he was shit-faced and would I mind locking the club. He then shat himself and fell asleep on the pool table. I carried on drinking as usual. I was in a succession of meetings about this emergency with Smelly Jim, who does the quiz, Crazy Mary behind the bar, and Albert, who sits at the end of the bar, drinks port and talks about his leg. I suddenly got a call from my brother, who was in the snug. He told me he suddenly felt badly ill. He'd vomited and felt like he might pass out, and there'd be nobody to look after his hamster. None of his usual hamster care options were available, all being in the pub and all pissed with us. His hamster was alone in the house. I immediately left the building and started to walk to his home. This was reported by Mrs. Price of number 4, the nosy old cow, who saw me run out of the pub. After a couple of bags of crisps and a kebab, my brother felt a bit better. Prior to leaving the pub, most of those who were drinking within 15 feet of me either had symptoms of being pissed or were pissed. I thought there was a distinct probability that I was pissed. I had a few conflicting thoughts in my mind. First, I was worried that if my brother was pissed, possibly shit-faced, there was nobody in Pontardawe that he could reasonably ask to look after his hamster. He had felt on edge of not being able to look after him safely a few hours earlier, after a few pre-pub liveners. I was thinking, what if the same or worse happens to me? There's nobody here that he can then reasonably ask to help. For years, I have warned of the dangers of lock-ins mid-week. The truth is that I had argued for lock-ins. I did not oppose them, but these stories had created a very bad atmosphere around my community. People came to my house shouting that I was a knobhead. There were posts that I was a knobhead on social media, and somebody even wrote that I was a knobhead in big white letters on the side of my house. The tentative conclusion was this: if he was unable to look after his hamster, then his daughters, my nieces, could look after him. My nieces are 3 and 7 and live with his ex in Trebanos. They are old enough to look after him, having great experience with dandelions and clover. However, despite ringing and ringing, I concluded my nieces were fast asleep. So it fell to me to care for the hamster. I walked for roughly half an hour in the wrong direction and ended up near the Castle Hotel. I did not visit the Castle Hotel. I did not walk around the Castle Hotel. I sat by a river. Although pissed, I concluded I could walk, so should turn around and go home. I felt a bit sick. I had no interactions with anybody save for an elderly gentleman walking nearby who appeared to recognize me. I shouted something about the offside rule, but we had no other interaction. I then decided to head back to the pub. On the way back, I needed the toilet. I walked to the side of the road. A courting couple were in a car by the side of the road. They were briefly outside. I briefly joined them. They shouted at me for a little bit and then got back into their car and left. I found their discarded briefs at the edge of the woods. I saw some people at a distance, but at no point did I break any social distancing rules, lying as I was on the grass. I then headed home. I believe that in all circumstances I behaved reasonably and legally. At no point between arriving home and leaving my driveway did I enter my house. My only exchanges with my wife were shouted conversations at a distance. Phrases such as, "My mother warned me you were an arsehole," and "You're a drunken lying shit" were apparently uttered. In the last few days, there have been many media reports that I subsequently returned to the pub. All these stories are false. Photos and data on my phone would prove this to be false had I not dropped it into the toilet of the club. And local CCTV, were it not vandalised, would also prove I am telling the truth. I believe that in almost all circumstances, I behaved reasonably and legally, balancing the safety of my brother's hamster and the extreme situation with the need to return to lock the clubhouse. I was involved in decisions affecting up to 9 people. I can understand that some people will argue that I should have just gone to sleep in my front garden, but I respectfully and politely disagree. It was 2 hours after my last drink. I therefore thought it was reasonable and sensible to attempt to enter my car and make the short journey to my brother's house, where Alistair, his hamster, would no doubt be upset. This was when PC Bryant appeared. He rang my wife, who by this time was fast asleep in bed, and told her what I had done. Unsurprisingly, given the condition that I was in, I do not remember this conversation in any detail. It was then that I allegedly pulled the police officer's trousers down and ran off. I have no recollection of any of this. I was apparently shouting things like, "I am untouchable," and "I'm Spartacus," and "I have to get to Alistair," over and over again. I do not remember throwing traffic cones into the river. I do not remember calling PC Bryant a fascist. I do not remember singing Sweet Caroline. I do not remember trying to steal a horse. I do not remember being improper with my next-door neighbour's gnome. I do not remember the riot van or the 30-minute drive to the station. I am on the governing committee of the rugby club. I wanted to explain what I thought, what I did, and why over this period, because I think that people like me who helped to make the rules should be accountable for their actions. Right. Any questions?